This video is sponsored by Squarespace. Stay tuned to the end of the video to find out how you can save 10% off your first purchase. Next up, we have Victini. V is for Victory and Generation 5, where this adorable fire rabbit debuted. It headlined 2 different movies, where it showed the mind-blowing power of V-Create, which has an argument for the coolest signature move in the game. Today, we'll delve into how victorious Victini was in the competitive scene, and thus we ask, how good was Victini actually? And in this video, we'll be going over these competitive formats. Victini, unfortunately, wasn't very good in its debut generation's OU. It didn't pack any notable defensive utility, which was crucial to have in a metagame with such a variety of threats. For example, even Terrakion, which is as all-out an offensive Pokemon as there is one of the best checks to Volcarona. Victini was merely a nuke, which wasn't bad, but Pokemon like Latios that could be nukes as well as have defensive utility were easier to slot in teams and more consistent in battle. Victini also had issues with the metagame defining rain and sand teams. The former assaulted it with boosted water moves while not caring about his signature V-Create, while the latter had Tyranitar to resist V-Create and pursued it to death. The popular defensive Heat Ran, commonly found on sand teams, also prevented V-Create from doing anything at all, and Victini struggled to damage it. Thus, when Victini was used, it was on sun teams as either a choice Bander or a choice Scarfer. By having its own weather on its side, it forced the opposing team into a conundrum. Either it got to launch utterly nuclear sun-boosted V-Creates that one-hit KO just about the entire tier, or the opponent had to chance their weather inducer. This was risky business for both inducers, as Victini could U-turn out of Tyranitar into Dugtrio, which of course also put an end to any V-Create absorption attempts from Heatran. Politoed wasn't as susceptible to Dugtrio, but what it was susceptible to was the monstrous Bolt Strike that Victini threatened it with. Victini was excellent at giving Sun the upper hand and eventually winning the Weather War. However, although it was good at that role, it was far from required on Sun teams. It faced competition with Heatran, who could lure in and trap the weather inducers with Magma Storm before Sunny Daying in their face and removing them with Solar Beam. This was a lot less prediction reliant, and Heatran came with the benefits of being a Steel type, thus letting it check Latios, one of the biggest threats to Sun. This made it easier to slot in on teams, and while Victini was certainly worth using, it was competing for a spot on a subset of teams that were already on the rarer side. Thus, it didn't see a lot of usage and dropped to UU. Victini in Black and White UU was the subject of a lot of controversy. It was considered by many players to be too much for the tier. Its choice band V-Creates were ludicrously powerful. To put it in perspective, Rhyperior is one of the most physically bulky Pokemon in the entire game, and it was soundly 3-hit KO'd. Victini didn't need to rely on getting one-on-ones where it could freely use V-Create though. If facing off against Waters or Flashfire Chandelure, it could drop them with Bolt Strike or Zen Headbutt. And it wasn't a slow glass cannon that had trouble getting in position either. 100 speed was great by UU standards, and it had great bulk and typing that allowed it to switch into Pokemon like Mew and Roserade. However, Banded Victini wasn't perfect. Stealth Rock significantly cut into its survivability, and spinning wasn't easy to fit onto teams, so it would rarely mow teams down one after another. Heck, as impressive as the V-Create on Rhyperior damage output is, if there was a Rhyperior, it would take Victini several tries to get just one KO, and that'd be all it'd get. V-Create's defense drop also exacerbated Victini's pursuit weakness, which cut into its ability to hit the kill button until everything on the opposing team had fainted, while the speed drop meant nearly everything could revenge kill it and go on the offensive in return. Victini was not beholden to always run Choice Band though. In fact, it had a tremendous coverage move pool, which when dipped into, pushed it over the edge in many players' view. Choice Band V-Create threatened to dust so many Pokemon that the opponent was required to go to their Rhyperior or Water, like Swampert or Blastoise. However, those Pokemon were absolutely destroyed by Grass Knot. It could even pick between V-Create and Blue Flare for stab. And while Victini crushed special walls like Umbreon and Porygon 2, Victini could also do that with Focus Blast, which even got a neat accuracy boost from Victini's Victory Star ability. Blue Flare not only smashed Gligar, but came with the benefit of not dropping Victini's defenses or speed, making it much harder to revenge kill. Opposing Fires, Quillfish, and Snorlax bit it from Victini's powerful stab Psyshock. This was an absolute menace of a set that terrorized every team without fail. Victini rarely actually swept entire teams with this set, but it wasn't supposed to, and it so regularly opened up such massive holes in the opposing team that battles were all but won by the time its own teammates came out to perform the formality of finishing the game. It was suspect tested, but the majority of the player base voted against a ban. However, even after the generation ended, Black and White UU's loyal player base continued to toss around the idea of UU without Victini, and several tournament battles saw both players agree to not use Victini. Finally, it's worth mentioning, Victini had a small but fearsome niche in Ubers with a Choice Scarf set. It was one of the few Pokemon capable of switching into Mewtwo safely, and it abused Groudon's Sun to the fullest, outrunning and raising everything with V-Create. Should Kyogre want to change the weather, it'd have to risk eating a Bolt Strike. Considering how terrifying Mewtwo was, being able to turn it into a KO for one's own team was certainly unique and a niche worth exploring, if only for the satisfaction of seeing the scariest Pokemon in the game drop in one hit. Victini was forgotten upon X and Y's release. The metagame was no longer weather-centric, but Megas and boosted knockoff everywhere, in addition to old standbys Heatran and Tyranitar remaining as powerful as ever, meant Victini was not on most people's minds. However, after the Aegislash ban, players were struggling to deal with Mega Gardevoir and Medicham, which went from useless with Aegislash around to monstrous with it gone. Victini resisted all of their moves as well as Mega Charizard Ys, while tying them in speed and threatening to one-hit KO in return. It was also a fearsome wall breaker itself. Alomomola seemed to be walling the entire metagame, but by running Substitute and Power Up Punch, Victini turned it into setup fodder, which let it then cruise past not just Alomomola, but also the Heatran and Gliscor backing Alomomola up, ripping a huge hole in the balance course that reigned over most of the metagame at the time. It was a legitimate niche, and Victini enjoyed high-level tournament usage, but then Oraz came around and it was forgotten about forever. Wow, that escalated quickly. It may seem like hyperbole, but there really was no reason to use Victini in the Oraz metagame, and thus no one used it. The newly added Mega Metagross meant Gardevoir and Medicham were forgotten about. The rise in spike stacking teams with Scarf Tyranitar meant Victini got worn down and trapped quickly, and as such was no longer good at beating balance, especially since they no longer used Alomomola, instead replacing it with Mega Slowbro, which also happened to be a perfect Victini counter. Even when Medicham resurged in usage, players preferred to counter it with Slowbro and Bold Clefable, which were far better against the overall metagame. Victini just occupied no usable niche in OU and was never seen again. Again, it seems like a drastic change, but this was not an exaggeration. Victini just never saw the light of day in serious Oraz. As a result of its lack of usage in early XY, Victini dropped to UU and was quickly banned. No one was interested in figuring out if the opposing Victini was going to brute force its way through with banded V-Creates, or if it was going to zero in on the few Pokemon capable of resisting the move and wipe them out with its tremendous special coverage option, especially since Victini had a million opportunities to cause havoc with Florges as such a necessary part of the tier. Generation 7 saw Victini banned from UU almost instantly, as Choice Band once again rolled over everything in its path, and with a different set, it could easily lure and dispatch the few things that didn't instantly die to V-Create. In OU, it ran a gimmicky Z Celebrate set on hyper offense teams, but it was matchup reliant and inconsistent, so it didn't see much use. However, when Ultra Sun and Moon were released, the fog became far more widespread, which made it less oppressive to fit hazard removal on a team, and it was soon discovered that Victini had a number of unique high-profile defensive qualities that it could reliably use when it didn't have Stealth Rock digging into it. It had a serious who's who of Pokemon it checked, Pokemon most of the metagame got bowled over by, mainly the monstrously powerful Tapu Lele and Magearna, while Mega Medicham and Mega Charizard Y were no joke either. As for sets, it had several options. Choice Scarf was safest, as it let it check a large majority of the offensive metagame beyond the four aforementioned Pokemon, such as Kartana if it could avoid switching into a knockoff, and Tapu Koko if it was able to come in on Hidden Power Ice. It was a great Scarfer because it kept momentum with U-turn instead of thudding against the switch. It was also still decent against defense, with tricks like Final Gambit and, well, Trick. Speaking of messing with defense, Choice Band sets checked less than the big four Victini was put on a team to handle, but they were peerless wall breakers. An opponent running a team of Celesteela, Toxapex, and friends could crumple in the face of those vicious V-Creates. Victini could even use Assault Vest to go all in on checking the special threats it was tasked with handling, avoiding nightmare scenarios like dipping low enough to suddenly be in range for Magearna's Gigavolt Havoc, and gaining new boons such as not being KO'd by unevolved Ash Greninja, allowing it to stay in and and surprise KO it, removing one of the biggest threats in OU. It was also a huge headache for defensive teams thanks to Power Up Punch, giving V-Create and Bolt Strike the power they needed without choice restriction, which let it ruin defensive cores that relied on predicting or protecting the scout which move it locked into, and to switching into the resist. It could also run Final Gambit, which often caught Rotom Wash, one of the safer checks to Victini in the tier, and whose removal benefited dangerous Pokemon like Greninja, Tornadus Therian, and offensive Celesteela. Finally, if a team's Z move was open, it could use Firium Z and fire off a super-powered Inferno Overdrive, meaning more power and no V-Create drawback, which meant the opponent couldn't yet prey on its defenses and speed being dropped, and making Victini even more of a threat. Victini also benefited greatly from each of the 4 terrains in OU. Electric terrain powered up Bolt Strike, Psychic terrain let it dodge Mawile Sucker Punches, and powered up Zen Headbutt, and Misty terrain meant Toxapex wouldn't poison it, but it was Grassy terrain that was its favorite, for it gave it recovery, which was important in letting it continuously switch into the things it was meant to check. Being able to take an Earthquake was nice as well. Victini made for a fierce duel with Ash Greninja, which usually had bulky grass types or Assault Vest Magearna as counters. Ash Greninja would bait these pokes in, and there was Victini's entrance for some V-shaped violence. Victini also absorbed attempts to revenge kill Greninja from Scarf Kartana and Tapu Lele like nothing and turned them into offense. 2 of the hardest hitting Pokemon in OU with Victini feeding off Greninja's weaknesses was a tough duel to stop. Overall, Victini truly came into its own as a legitimate, self-sufficient part of OU in Gen 7, equal parts an unwallable threat and an important piece of a team's defensive integrity. And that's it. So how good was Victini actually? Well, in OU, it was spotty in its first 2 generations, but it finally broke through into the fog-laden Ultra Sun and Moon, checking some of the most dangerous Pokemon around and dishing out offense in return. It's been famously too much for UU, with many top players claiming it should have been banned in its inaugural generation, then getting banned nearly instantly in the other 2. Victini's history has been short, but it's certainly been eventful. In Pokemon and in life, timing is everything. Switching in a Ferrothorn against a Heatran, bad timing. Misclicking on Showdown and then closing out immediately, bad timing. Luckily, with the tools available with Squarespace, you'll never have to deal with a temporal mishap ever again. Squarespace is a website building service that offers full online booking scheduling functions for making your clients, customers, or students' lives way easier. Set availability, coordinate, and schedule as needed to run a tighter ship than the SSN. Actually, not like the SSN, because now that I think about it, it kind of just left when it felt like it. Head over to squarespace.com for a free trial, then when you're ready, go to squarespace.com/FSG to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. Thanks for watching, everyone, and as always, if you liked the video and you want to see more, be sure to subscribe to False Swipe Gaming for more weekly Pokemon content. And of course, in the comments, I want to know, what do you think about competitive Victini? How would you change it? Would you shore up its weaknesses a little bit? Whatever it is, let me know in the comments. And thank you so much to our patrons for continued support of our videos, and thank you to everyone else watching as well. And follow my crew on these social media platforms, and that's all I got. See you next time, everyone.